What's up? I'm Wicked, and today I'd like to talk to you about the ego. Over here at my channel, we're right in the middle of the chakra series. So far, we have done the root, the sacral, and the solar plexus chakra. And I felt like this was a really good time to introduce the ego. I've already gone over the shadow self, but that is just one part of the spiritual self. And this is the perfect time to introduce the ego because the ego is so closely related to the solar plexus. The solar plexus is all about the self. These are the I have affirmations, and it's so closely related to the ego because it just has the same encompassing energy of looking out for the self. However, we're really programmed to think of ego as like someone having a big ego, like they're so full of themselves. But that's just one way that the ego can manifest with that over-exaggerated self-importance. But on the daily and more commonly, the ego manifests itself as that little voice in the back of your head that's telling you that you can't do these things. The ego is the voice that flares up and tells you that you're tired and inspires you to yawn when you're just about to get started on a project that will probably change your life. The ego doesn't mean to be an enemy. It is the part of the self that really believes it is protecting the self, but it's actually just protecting the cultivated idea of the self that we have created throughout our lives. The ego is the idea of who we are. It's the box that we put ourselves in. It is the characteristics that we use to define ourselves, but it is not actually who we are as people, and it is certainly not the higher self. The ego is the one who probably tells you that none of this is real when you're trying to meditate and channel higher beings. The ego is the one that tells you that you can't try that thing because you're just not that type of person. Or why would you even try to enter that contest? You never win. It's that voice full of doubt. The ego's whole purpose, whole objective is to just keep us in the known where it feels comfortable. Now, the greatest things, all of life, happens outside of the comfort zone. When you step out of your ego's preconceived idea of how your life should be, that is when you fully open yourself up to experience and all of the possibilities that life has to offer. The ego is essentially the big bad in spirituality. We talk about the shadow side a lot, and it gets such a bad rap because it's so closely related to our human nature, and those aren't the most sightly things. But in truth, the shadow side probably has your best interest in mind more often than the ego does. The ego's idea of self-preservation is preserving an idea of who you are, and it cares very little for your actual safety. Your shadow side is the part of you that's really trying to keep you safe at the end of the day. It's operating off of your instincts. It's just trying to survive the situation. Now, one of the other things to be mindful of is the major effect that ego has on manifestation. The ego has such a desire to keep things the same that when we're trying to manifest new situations, new jobs, new lovers, new friends, new items, whatever it is, the ego is going to be the first one to come up and block that. Sorry, that's not for me. That doesn't fit into my category of who I believe I am. No, I could never be rich. I grew up with a poverty mindset, and I'm going to hang on to that until the day I die. That's what the ego does. Now, when you're trying to manifest, some of the biggest things that hinder you is that ego feedback loop that our brain gives us. So when you're trying to adapt a new habit or kick an old one, some of the best things that you can do is change your surroundings. Now, this might sound a little silly, and I'm not even talking about this in terms of feng shui. If you want to incorporate feng shui into things, that's just going to give you an extra energetic boost, but it isn't necessary for this purpose. Essentially, what you want to do is create a different environment so that your ego isn't going to default to its pre-programmed methods. If you put the ego in a new space, it is going to have to come up with new narratives to tell itself. And that is where you get to kind of inject your new coding, okay? That is when you get to decide what the program is. If you can stop yourself in that ego feedback loop. And now the ego is 5 sense related, just 5 senses. Everything that you can see, smell, hear, taste, and touch. That is what the ego is feeding off of. So when you begin to change the surroundings and the senses that it gets and that it operates off are different, that's when you get these windows of opportunity to change its outlook on your entire life. Another way to program the ego is through repetition. And this can be repeating mantras, writing them down, or just taking yourself to the same place and experiencing the same sort of energy. Like if you're trying to buy a new house, take yourself to the neighborhood that you would like to live in and visualize yourself living there. Get into that feeling as much as possible. Your ego's not going to know quite how to block this. It might start coming up with, arguing limitations like you can't afford this yet, blah, 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 blah. That's when you have to be prepared to get out ahead of it. And you have to figure out what that narrative looks like for you. Like, no, I can't afford it today, but I have this plan, and I know that when this plan is complete, then I'll be able to. It's like an internal game of convincing yourself that things are possible, because that's what you have to do to break through the ego's current feedback loop. Another important thing to take into consideration, and I'll get into this when I start doing some videos that are a little more craft focused and we begin talking about spell casting, but if you are in the practice of casting spells or even saying affirmations, some of the best things you can do to kind of trick your ego is to use different languages when casting and affirming. And from the ego, human perspective, you're probably going to feel like, how is the universe going to understand what I'm saying, what I'm asking for, what I'm trying to create if I don't understand? Well, you do. You do understand, because you're the one who's going to go to Google Translate or whatever and figure out what these words are, because you want to use a language that you're not as familiar with, that your ego doesn't already have an established relationship with. You're going to know what they mean, and you need to program the way that it feels into them. So say your affirmation is, I am a billionaire. So you go to Google Translate and you figure out what it is in Latin. And now your affirmation is ego sum billionaire. Yeah, there's not really a Latin word for billionaire, if I'm correct. But ego sum, I am. Just that little tweak is going to confuse your ego enough that it's not going to be able to combat these affirmations so easily. And this is a great way to get yourself more comfortable with new affirmations. Like, if your focus is self-love and you're trying to tell yourself that you're beautiful, that you're powerful, that you're capable, and you're not in the habit of believing these things, what you can do instead of dealing with the discomfort that it brings up, because like if you don't believe those things about yourself and you're trying to change your perspective, you're going to say these things to yourself and imposter syndrome is going to kick in. You're going to feel like a fraud, and it's going to feel awful to affirm, and that's not how affirmations should feel. It's just there's a process when you switch from one extreme to the other. You can't really get there from there. You need to travel, right? And one of the ways that you can do that is to bring in a substitute language, because you can repeat these affirmations as long as you're feeling the feeling. It's not about what you're saying, it's about what you're feeling. The universe is going to understand you, and it is going to be a more gentle transition. Slowly, as you get to bringing English back into your affirmations or whatever your native language is, that is when you're going to be able to get more comfortable, because you've already been pre-programming yourself with this idea that you're beautiful, lovable, capable, and wonderful. And your ego now, you've been saying it to yourself, even if you don't fully realize it. I mean, you realize it, but you may not recognize the words. But you have been saying it to yourself. And your ego isn't combating this because it doesn't know what to do. So when you make that slight shift, there is no change in the energy. And as you've gotten programmed to this energy, it'll be a lot easier to stand there and tell yourself all of these amazing things, because you'll be so much closer to believing them without your ego's interference. Ego and the solar plexus. Having a huge ego would be what happens when the solar plexus is extremely overactive. Having no self-value, self-worth, no belief in yourself, not liking yourself very much, that is when your solar plexus is going to be underactive. It won't be functioning correctly, and it's probably extremely blocked. And the solar plexus gets blocked by us talking shit about ourselves. So one of the ways to get out ahead of all of this is to speak kindly to yourself. Believe nice thoughts about you. You don't have to believe that you're God's gift to the earth, but start at least with believing that you're a decent person who deserves the same basic human decency that everybody else does. That's a good place to start if you're in the process of, or in the habit of self-hate or disdain. Unfortunately, that's really pushed into our culture, especially right now with all of the social media. It's really easy to find reasons to hate yourself. So don't allow your ego to be another voice affirming that for you. Train that motherfucker to work on your behalf and to take care of you, because it is possible. And you can do this without becoming some egotistical jerk. You can love yourself and still remain humble. It is entirely possible. And you're going to want to get really comfortable with your relationship with your ego, because not only is it going to help you manifest, it's going to help you in your chakra work as well. If you can tame your ego, you can get your solar plexus functioning properly, and that's going to allow you to transcend to the heart chakra. If you have an unchecked ego and you're trying to get up into the heart chakra, you're definitely going to hit that mirror wall. And we'll dive more into mirror walls in my next video. But for now, take a little bit of time to evaluate how you relate to yourself. Spend, the next couple days being mindful of your ego and where it pops up. The ego is going to come from a more gut-centered place, not low gut, high gut. It's going to feel kind of like anxiety. Whereas the higher self, the intuition, it speaks from a heart center. It's very calm, very in tune. The ego is going to have a lot of urgency to it. Ego is going to want you to handle things right now to protect your identity in this situation. And it is detrimental that you don't listen to ego, because you want to take a minute and a breath so you can respond instead of react in this pre-programmed way. This is how we break out of old cycles, old habits, old belief systems, all of the old chains that are holding us back. We can begin freeing ourselves from them once we take control of our self-narrative, and that starts by getting our ego in check. If you would like to find out more about any of these topics, you can visit wickedwitchesweb.com. Check out the chakra section, check out the parts of the spiritual self. I will also leave a link in the description for the shadow self video and the other chakras as well. For now, that's all I have for this one. Thank you so much for joining me, and make sure to like and subscribe so that I can help you keep your third eye in the sky. Blessed be.